While the entire Western world scrambles to figure out how to deal with Donald Trump and his tariffs, one man is sitting back, watching it all unfold, and quietly turning the chaos into the biggest diplomatic win of the decade. That man is Xi Jinping. And right now, as we speak, world leaders from Europe, from Canada, from Asia, they are literally lining up at Beijing's doorstep, asking China for help. Think about that for a second. The same countries that spent years trying to contain China, trying to limit its influence, trying to decouple their economies from Beijing, those same countries are now flying across the world with massive business delegations, shaking hands with Xi Jinping and signing deals. And the latest one to make the trip? Germany's brand new chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who just landed in Beijing with one hand extended for trade, and the other hand asking for China's help to end the war in Ukraine. This is not just another diplomatic visit, folks. This is a seismic shift in global power dynamics happening right in front of our eyes. And if you want to understand what is really going on behind the scenes, you are in the right place. But before we dive deep into this, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and share this video with someone who needs to understand how the world is actually changing. Trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see global politics very differently. Let us get into it. So here is the situation. On February 25, 2026, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz touched down in Beijing for his very first official visit to China since taking office last May. And this was not some casual diplomatic courtesy call. Merz arrived with a large business delegation in tow, representing some of Germany's biggest industrial heavyweights, and he had two very specific goals. Number one, he wanted to press China for fairer trade conditions for German companies. And number two, he wanted to convince Xi Jinping to use China's influence over Moscow to help bring an end to Russia's 4-year-old war in Ukraine. Now, let us pause right here because you need to understand the context of why this visit is so significant. Germany is the largest economy in Europe. It is the third largest economy in the entire world. And yet, it is in serious trouble. Its industrial base, the backbone of the German economic miracle, is under enormous pressure. Volkswagen, the crown jewel of German manufacturing, announced in December 2025 the first closure of a production plant in Germany in its 88-year history. Let that sink in. 88 years without closing a single factory, and now the dominoes are starting to fall. And a huge reason for this is China. You see, the trade numbers tell a devastating story. In 2025, Germany imported 170.6 billion euros worth of goods from China. That is about $201 billion. But here is the kicker: German exports to China went in the opposite direction, falling 9.7% to just 81.3 billion euros, roughly $96 billion. So Germany is buying more than double from China what China is buying from Germany. The trade deficit between the two countries shot up 142.8% in just the first 8 months of 2025 compared to the year before. And it gets worse. China reclaimed its position as Germany's #1 trading partner last year, with total bilateral trade hitting 251.8 billion euros, pushing the United States back to second place. But the nature of that trade has fundamentally changed. German cars, which used to be the symbol of industrial prowess in China, are losing ground fast. Chinese electric vehicles are flooding into European markets, and the old made-in-Germany prestige just does not carry the same weight anymore. Chinese automakers, powered by massive government subsidies, aggressive innovation, and economies of scale that European competitors simply cannot match, are eating Germany's lunch. And not just in China, but in Europe itself. So when Merz flew to Beijing, he was not negotiating from a position of strength. He was negotiating from a position of necessity. And Xi Jinping knows this. Beijing knows this. And that is exactly why this visit played out the way it did. Now here is where it gets really interesting. MERS was not the only Western leader making the pilgrimage to Beijing. In fact, he was just the latest in what has become a parade of world leaders showing up at Xi Jinping's door. In January alone, at least 5 national leaders visited Beijing. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer made the trip, the first visit by a British Prime Minister to China in 8 years. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney went, also the first Canadian leader to visit Beijing since 2017. Ireland's Taoiseach made the journey, the first Irish leader to do so in 14 years. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung visited. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo came through. French President Emmanuel Macron had already been there with a state visit in December. And now MERS. All of them, every single one, are traditional allies of the United States. And every single one of them has been hit by Trump's tariff blitz. And this is the part that should blow your mind. Think about the irony here. Donald Trump's entire trade war strategy was supposed to isolate China, to force countries to choose sides, to build a coalition against Beijing. But what is actually happening? The exact opposite. Trump's tariffs have not isolated China. They have isolated America. His unpredictable foreign policy, his demands for Greenland, his threats against allies, his 100% tariff threats against Canada for daring to trade with China, all of this has pushed America's closest partners straight into Beijing's waiting arms. And Xi Jinping is playing this masterfully. While Trump is burning bridges, Xi is building them. China's state media openly described these visits as countries scrambling to come to Beijing, and they are not wrong. Analysts have called this a hedging strategy, where Western nations are keeping the China Channel open as strategic insurance against Washington's chaos. But let us be real, is more than hedging. It is a fundamental realignment of global relationships. Now, let us talk about what actually happened when MERS sat down with Xi Jinping. The meeting took place at the Diaoyutai State Guest House in Beijing, a location steeped in diplomatic history. And the messaging from both sides was very carefully crafted. Xi told MERS that China and Germany are the world's second and third largest economies, and that their bilateral relationship has significant impact not just on their own countries, but on Europe and the entire world. He said the international landscape is undergoing the most profound transformations since the end of World War II. And then Xi laid out his vision. He said China and Germany should be, and I am paraphrasing here, reliable partners that support each other and defenders of free trade. He called on both countries to uphold the central position of the United Nations, to safeguard multilateralism, to practice international rule of law, and to defend free trade. Now, if you read between the lines, every single one of those points is a direct shot at the United States. Defending multilateralism? That is a contrast to Trump's unilateralism. Upholding the United Nations? Trump has been openly challenging the UN and the global order. Defending free trade? Trump is the one imposing tariffs on everyone. Xi positioned China as the reasonable, reliable partner in a world gone mad, and MERS, frankly, had very little room to push back on that framing. But MERS did try to press his case. He called for fair cooperation. He brought up the issue of systemic overcapacities in Chinese manufacturing, export restrictions, and market access barriers that distort competition. He emphasized that Europe wants partnership with China that is balanced, reliable, regulated, and fair. And he made a point of placing Germany's China policy in a European context, noting that his visit came right after Macron and Starmer and ahead of a planned trip by Trump himself in early April. His message was clear. Europe speaks with a unified voice on China. But here is the thing. The joint statement that came out of the meeting tells you a lot about who had the upper hand. Both sides agreed to support efforts for a ceasefire and lasting peace in Ukraine based on the UN Charter. They emphasized fair competition and mutual market access. They agreed to continue dialogue on climate change and the green transition. And representatives from both sides signed several agreements on climate change and food security. Sounds productive, right? But if you look closely, there are no concrete concessions from China on the trade deficit. No specific commitments to reduce overcapacity. No binding agreements to open up the Chinese market to German companies. She gave MERS the language of partnership without giving him the substance of structural change. And this is Xi Jinping's genius. He gives you the meeting. He gives you the photo op. He gives you the joint statement. He gives you the feeling of progress. But the fundamental imbalance, that stays exactly where it is. Now, let us talk about the Ukraine angle because this is equally fascinating. MERS explicitly asked China to use its influence to help end the war in Ukraine. He told reporters after the talks that signals from Beijing are taken very seriously in Moscow, referring to both words and deeds. And he said he welcomed China's commitment to peace in the region, which he heard during the meeting. Xi, for his part, told MERS that China supports a political solution to the conflict in Ukraine. He said the key is to persist in seeking solutions through dialogue and negotiation. But, and this is the crucial but, she emphasized that any talks would have to address the legitimate concerns of all sides and have equal participation of all parties. Now, if you are familiar with diplomatic language, you know what that means. It means China is not going to pressure Russia to do anything Russia does not want to do. The phrase legitimate concerns of all sides is code for acknowledging Russia's security concerns, which is essentially Moscow's justification for the invasion. And equal participation of all parties means China is not going to let itself be used as a tool of Western pressure against Putin. It is the same position Beijing has maintained since the war began, dressed up in slightly warmer language because MERS was sitting across the table. And here is the deeper strategic calculation. Many European governments have been frustrated that China has not done more to pressure Russia. China has maintained robust trade and close diplomatic ties with Moscow throughout the entire conflict. It has provided economic lifelines that have helped Russia weather Western sanctions. And Beijing continues to insist that its position on the war is impartial and objective, which, let us be honest, is a stretch when you consider how much China has benefited from buying discounted Russian energy and filling the vacuum left by Western companies that pulled out of the Russian market. But Europe needs China more than China needs Europe right now, at least in the short term. So MERS cannot afford to push too hard on Ukraine without jeopardizing the trade relationship that Germany desperately needs. And she knows this. So he offers just enough on Ukraine to keep the Europeans coming back without actually changing anything on the ground. MERS also raised the issue of Taiwan during the meeting, saying that any reunification must be done peacefully. This is standard European diplomatic language, but it is worth noting because it shows MERS trying to maintain some independent positioning. He was not just rolling over on everything. He was trying to balance Germany's economic needs with its values and security concerns. But the reality is, when you are negotiating from economic weakness, your leverage on geopolitical issues is limited. Now let us zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because this is where it gets really powerful. What we are witnessing is nothing less than a restructuring of the global order. For 75 years, the United States was the anchor of the Western Alliance. NATO, the World Trade Organization, the United Nations framework, All of these institutions were built with American leadership and sustained by American commitment. And now, in the space of just a few years, that anchor is being pulled up. Trump's America First agenda has told its allies, "You are on your own. Pay for your own defense. Accept our tariffs or face consequences. Give us Greenland. Stop trading with China or we will punish you." And what has been the response? European leaders are not falling in line. They are diversifying. They are flying to Beijing. French President Macron has been pushing for European strategic autonomy for years, and now his vision is becoming mainstream, not because Europeans suddenly agree with him, but because they have no choice. When the British Prime Minister visits China for the first time in 8 years, when the Canadian Prime Minister negotiates tariff reductions with Beijing despite Trump threatening 100% tariffs, when Germany's new Chancellor makes China his first major international destination outside Europe, this is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The world is moving toward a multipolar system faster than anyone predicted, and China is positioning itself at the center of it. Xi Jinping's strategy is elegant in its simplicity. He is not trying to replace America. He is offering an alternative. While Trump says comply or face tariffs, Xi says let us cooperate. While Trump challenges the international order, Xi positions China as its defender. While Trump pushes allies away, Xi welcomes them with state dinners and joint statements. And the beauty of it, from Beijing's perspective, is that Xi does not even have to make real concessions. The trade deficit with Europe keeps growing. China's manufacturing overcapacity continues to flood global markets. But because Trump is perceived as the bigger threat to the rules-based order, Western leaders are willing to accept China's terms just to have a stable alternative partner. As Chinese Premier Li Qiang told MERS during their meeting in Beijing's Great Hall of the People, unilateralism and protectionism have gained ground and become prevalent in some countries. He did not name the United States, but he did not have to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who he was talking about, and Li called on both sides to work together to safeguard multilateralism and free trade. Again, framing China as the responsible actor and the United States as the disruptor. Whether you agree with that framing or not, it is working. Country after country is showing up in Beijing, not because they suddenly love the Chinese Communist Party, but because in a world of chaos, Beijing is offering a semblance of order. But here is the question we need to ask. Is this sustainable? Can Xi Jinping keep this balancing act going? Can he keep welcoming Western leaders, offering them nice words about free trade and multilateralism, while running a $1.2 trillion global trade surplus and maintaining structural barriers that protect Chinese industries at the expense of foreign competitors? The answer is probably yes, at least for now. As long as Trump continues to alienate American allies, as long as Europe remains divided and economically vulnerable, and as long as the war in Ukraine keeps European governments desperate for any diplomatic channel they can find, Xi Jinping holds the cards. The irony is stunning. The United States spent decades building a coalition to counter China's rise. It invested trillions in alliances, trade agreements, and military partnerships designed to maintain the American-led order. And now one administration's policies are undoing all of that, driving America's closest allies into the arms of its biggest strategic competitor. Xi Jinping did not have to outmaneuver the West. The West is outmaneuvering itself. All she had to do was stand still and let the chaos come to him. And that is perhaps the most dangerous development in global politics today. Not because China is a supervillain, but because the system that was supposed to keep global competition in check is fracturing from within. So what happens next? MERS is continuing his 2-day visit in Beijing, with more meetings and more photo opportunities. Trump is expected to visit China around March 31st. And Europe will continue trying to walk the tightrope between Washington and Beijing, hoping it does not fall off. But one thing is crystal clear. The world is not going back to the way it was. The parade of leaders flying to Beijing is not a temporary phenomenon. It is the new normal. And Xi Jinping, whether you admire him or fear him, has positioned himself as the man everyone needs to talk to. That is power. That is influence. And that is the story of 2026. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Europe is making the right move by deepening ties with China? Or is this a dangerous gamble? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video opened your eyes, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and share this video with your friends and family. The world is changing fast, and the more people understand what is going on, the better prepared we all are. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.